Quick, we'll dive in here real quick on on who's on the screen. We got myself, Joe Reese. I'm the community and partnership manager here at onX Backcountry. Ironically, I've been organizing ski mountaineering races for a number of years here, and honored to put on the winter version of the rut. So it's been great to kind of see what these two guys have been doing in the summer and iterate off that, and honored to be in the presence of two awesome individuals in the ultra running space. I'll hand it over to you, Mike. Foote.
Yeah, hi everyone. Great to be here. Thanks for joining. I wear a lot of different hats. Probably most importantly to this discussion is I am one of the co-founders of the Rut. Wolfe and I started it back in 2013, and we're celebrating our 10th year this year. And so sounds like a lot of you on the call today are planning to run either maybe the 28K or 50K. And we're sorry that we're making you do this. It's it's a fun adventure. We try and make it really hard for you, but at the same time, it's webinars like this and opportunities like this where we can kind of share information and answer questions. That's also really great because we want people to ultimately succeed, but just barely. So great to be here.
For some more positivity, over to Mike Wolfe.
Hey everybody, Mike Wolfe. I live in Bozeman here, and I am obviously co-founded the Rut with Foote 10 years ago. It's crazy to think it's already been 10 years. I live in Bozeman and own and operate the Mountain Project. It's a gym and training facility here in town. Just excited to chat with everyone and hear people's questions about ultra running, if that's what you want to talk about in general or Rut specific. I know Foote and I have the event, but specifically the course that's shown on onX Backcountry pretty much ingrained in our souls at this point. So we can talk about that at length if anyone wants.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So really what's on the docket tonight is getting dialed for this adventure. We'll break down the sections, talk about some of the gear and why it's required for the Rut, diving into some of those trails to mimic race day, realizing that not everyone lives in Big Sky and or the mountains if they're running an ultra race. Maybe they're at sea level, or maybe it's flat. And then lastly, for any of you that do not have an entry to the Rut, we are so psyched to work with the Mikes here to give away 2 entries to the Rut tonight. So be on it, and we'll do that at the end. And that is for this year. So if you haven't been training, get off the horse and start training, because you've got a little less than a month to get on it.
A little more than a month.
A little more than a month. Sorry.
Don't make me nervous.
Sorry. Before we do that, working with these guys, we're giving away a 2-month trial and 30% off. So you can do either, you can scan this QR code and jump in right now, or you can hit the bit.ly link there, Rut MC promo, and you can join onX Backcountry. The map is already preloaded. You don't need to embed or upload anything. And we'll go through that tonight. And psyched to work with these guys to do that. So let's talk about getting dialed for an adventure. When looking at an ultra or any sort of adventure like this, I think there's all things that go through in our heads and our minds and our gear. And so I hand it over to the Mikes to really talk about, like, how does one get dialed for an adventure like this or an ultra?
You want me to go first, Foote?
Do it. Go for it.
So the first thing, just a race specifically like the Rut, is you certainly want to try to train as specific to the race environment you're going to be in, if you can. And there's certainly ways to fudge here or there, depending on where you live. But the way that I like to think about mountain running, ultra running in general, and training is very dissimilar to traditional like road running or distance running, where mostly people train and they train off like a mileage based plan. They run a certain number of miles per day or a certain number of miles per week. They do a long run that's a certain number of miles, et cetera, et cetera. In the mountains, I basically take that and throw it out the window. And the way I like people to think about training is you're going to be running up and down hill. So you focus on your heart rate, how long you're on your feet, and then how much vertical gain and loss you're getting during your training. And then also we focus a lot on strength training. Strength training, there's a lot of people that would go one side of the spectrum or the other on whether strength training is beneficial, but I think both Foote and I firmly believe, based off lots of personal experience and seeing others, is that strength training for mountain running is very beneficial. So we integrate that or recommend that into people's training as well. And then the other bullet point here is in terms of like training your stomach to handle the load of running at altitude, running in heat, maybe running in snow, you never know. And you want to train your stomach just like you train your body. And then to go one step further, there's ways you can train your mind as well for long events. So that's just kind of a 30,000 foot view of how we think about training for an adventure or a long race like this, which honestly, the rut for 99% of the people out there is an adventure. People think about it as an adventure, which I think is good, as opposed to a race, because you're on your feet for a long time. And it is an adventure. The terrain, the landscape is a good way to think about it, being on an adventure rather than running a race.
With 10 years in the bucket, anything else to add, Mike, about this? Buddy, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more with everything that Mike said. It can be tricky. I think I saw one of the questions that came in, prior to doing the webinar here. We kind of solicited some questions. One was like, how do you train with specificity and purpose if you live in Chicago or somewhere flat? It can be really tricky. And I kind of goes back to that strength training side of things. Like, you can make your body quite I like to say that durability is the equivalent of speed in the mountains, because you get pretty beat up, and it's like something like the rut can be a race or an adventure of attrition where as you get further and deeper into your 28K or 50K or whatever ultra you're running, your body can start to really fall apart on you. And having that resilience and that durability is what will, and that strength that you can draw from late in a race is paramount. And being able to just be in the mountains all the time is great. But if you don't have access to them, if you can't always just be running up and down Lone Peak, there's ways that you can do it. You can run and then introduce a lot of a variety of different strength work, whether it be plyometrics or max strength stuff, without getting too into the weeds. But there's ways that you can pull on different levers to still be prepared to have a really great day in the mountains and stay healthy during it and run a good time. And I think Mike touched on pretty much everything, but I'm looking at the bullet points here, and recovery is great. I think both Mike and I know that you can get really strong in the mountains and by training really hard, but you can also wear yourself down and break yourself. So it's important when you go big to always listen to your body and let it adapt to the stress and the stimulus. It's training isn't just training or just recovery, it's both. So being able to toggle back and forth is what helps people stay really consistent and get strong.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. You guys touched on it a little bit. Obviously hoping not to chafe, but also maybe snow, maybe rain, who knows? Can you get into the gear, not just only for the rut, but like, why is this gear required for ultra races? And some of it's pretty specific to the rut. Bear spray is not one required piece of gear I see often, but like, why is this gear important and what does it mean to a racer?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things in like the ethos of mountain running is this idea of autonomy in the mountains, this idea of like being able to have what you need to take care of yourself, whether you're doing just a long run in the backcountry or running a race like the Rut 50K. There's real risk and hazard and objective hazards in the mountains, and that doesn't suddenly go away when there's an event or a race, and it doesn't suddenly go away when you're on a long run in the backcountry, and so with all that said, for the rut specifically, we have a very small mandatory kit now. This is quite common in most of the world in the sport of ultra and trail running. Yet in the US, it's been a little bit slower to catch on, and frankly, the rut has a little bit more of that objective risk and hazard, being in bigger mountains and more exposure and steep, loose terrain. So yeah, we have just a really small kit requiring a certain amount of water. For the 50K, it's 32 ounces of water. For the 28K, it's only 16 ounces of water, a space blanket, and a light rain shell, something breathable but waterproof. Obviously, for the 50K, it starts before sunrise, so having a little headlamp is key as well. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea and the ethos that we've always drawn from the event is like real mountain running. And again, it's an event, but the risks are still there, and all of our runners need to take that into account and have that autonomy. So I think all this stuff is really common for running into the mountains and going for long runs and big adventures, which we all love to do. And so it makes a lot of sense to also have it in race environment.
It's already like, you guys have a pretty big recommended gear list. Is there anything that last year was super hot, people were covered in salt, but is there anything that you would say is like more recommended than less recommended, or are they all equally share as weight?
Yeah, if you jump onto the website, you can go to the equipment page and see this long list of things. And, we're in bear country. Like, we recommend bear spray. It can be really hot. So like making sure you have sunscreen and coverage, and you're not as exposed to the sun when you're just up on those high ridges all day. I mean, we've had snow and we've had hot, smoky days. So it kind of classically in the mountains in early fall, late summer, you can kind of get anything. And so for us, it's about having the ability to stay comfortable to complete the task at hand. And so throwing on a rain jacket is great. Having enough food and water so that you don't bonk or get super dehydrated. I mean, these things happen each and every year and are quite common. So, that extra bit of food that you're bringing might weigh a little bit more, but it also will give you the energy you need to complete the race in the style that you want. So yeah, it's hard to say. I feel like it's all kind of important, and we have a small list of required gear and a long list of recommended gear because we want people to be thinking about it. And ultimately it's about people's safety and about having a really positive experience.
Awesome. We had the guys drop a link in the chat to the recommended gear for the rut. And so let's dive into, the breakdown of the rut itself. And I'll hand it over to you guys. There's several races that this weekend, it's not, it's kind of unique in its space, but take it from there.
Yeah. Do you want me to chat
Go
about
for
it?
Yeah, I know it in the winter, so you guys know in the summer. So let's go for it.
Yeah. So the Rut 50K started in 2013. I think we introduced the 28K in 2015 or 16. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, I think 2016.
Yeah. And I like to say that the 28K is like the Rut 50K, but harder, because it essentially is straight to the brass tacks and there's no beating around the bush. It's just straight up into the steep stuff. But of course, they're both really challenging races. You know, when we started this race, well, a couple years before the race actually came to fruition, we were discussing what it would look like to put on an event that felt like some of the events and races that we experienced while competing over in Europe and in other parts of the world, something that felt really severe and just different than all the other, like a lot of the other race courses we've seen in the US. And, you know, Lone Peak turned into a perfect spot for it. And, you know, it's a beast of a race. It's kind of got everything, you know, especially for the 50K. There are runnable sections of single track and trail, and then suddenly you're in terrain that might only be a few miles on the map, but can take a few hours to get done. And so being able to have the skill sets to kind of transition from running to power hiking and knowing how to move through terrain that is constantly changing and in a big way is going to be really important. You know, you can see the statistics here, you know, 10,500 feet of climbing for the 50K, little less than 8,000 feet of climbing in the 28K. You know, a fair amount of single track, fair amount of like ski run, dirt road stuff. And then the off trail, you know, that's a lot of the ridge lines. And again, it might not look big on the map because it's a short distance, but it takes up the majority of the race at times for some people. So it's really important to get used to that. Yeah, we love it. You know, it gets people out of their comfort zones. It's like Mike was talking about before, it's truly an adventure. Yeah, I think, and I'm sure, and we're about to get into this, but I'll definitely plant the seed, whether you're running the rut or any race or ultra. I think one of the biggest and most important things to do is actually get really familiar with the course. And obviously it's great if you can get out on the land and ground truth it, but obviously with maps and, you know, with onX maps, you can take a look at it and like really just get used to or get familiar with what the course is going to look like. You know, I'll say every single year I get emails, and I usually forward them to Mike because I think it's hilarious, from people who say, wait a second, I'm going up that mountain. Oh, is it going to be steep? And, you know, we try our best to make it so that people know what kind of an event it's going to be and how challenging the terrain is. But every year there's people who show up to the race and have no idea what they're getting into. And we do and, you know, we want everybody to know what they're getting into. So it's, you know, we'll spend a few minutes here coming up on the actual course and sharing, like, you know, what section. It's like so great to do a deep dive into it and really like break it down, aid station to aid station, really check out the sections, think how long it's going to take, think how long you're going to need to, or how much water and food you'll need to get from point A to point B. So it's a really great tool. And I think that people spend, I'll say this last thing and then I'll quit rambling, but people spend hours and hours and hours, week after week, month after month training. And then they forget to do the little things like check out the course or make sure they have the right gear. And, you know, this is all about setting people up for success, for having the best experience they can at the event. And yeah, being able to dial in the course is a huge part of that.
Sweet, let's do it. And yeah, it is steep. So if you downloaded onX map, if you use that QR code, if you already have the map, this course is already preloaded into your into the account. So you've got the 50K, you've got the 28K, you've got the VK, you've got the 11K. I went a step further here and I downloaded the GPX file to kind of isolate that for this talk in particular. So you know, I'm familiar with the base village, and so you start there. Mike, what time is that at for the start? And we can kind of go through those. There's 6 sections here. We'll start to moonlight to second moonlight to swift current to summit, the Shedhorn water station, and then andesite to finish. 6 sections total for the 50K.
Yeah, and Mike, I'll keep rambling here, but feel free to jump in. couple things. One is, as we talk about the Rut 50K here, we'll also share about the some of the more important parts of the 28K because their overlap is quite large. So just if you're running the 28K and you're curious, we're going to speak to that too. And I'll do my best to kind of move along through all these sections so that we don't spend too much time on it. But as you'll see, the dotted blue line is the Rut 50K course. Obviously, it's showing all the other trails in the area as well, which is great. But yeah, so race starts 6 a.m. on Sunday, September 4th. And you head up in the dark up a dirt road. And after a couple miles, you get onto a section of super steep single track that kind of continues a climb. You do this nice little horseshoe kind of just in this, I guess they call it the Swift Current area of Big Sky Resort. Not getting into the Alpine yet, but pretty technical, kind of loose footing. You have a really fun descent here that Joe's showing, wrapping your way back down as you head over to the north into Moonlight. It's early on. People are running fast. They're maybe going out a little too fast. We'll see, but it's a really quote unquote runnable section of the course. And there's a lot of good energy right then. So you head over to Moonlight 1, where these blue onX waypoints are. And then you do a loop over on these kind of more, what I would call buffed out, non-technical, rolling, undulating, smoother cross-country mountain bike trails over on the Moonlight side of Big Sky Resort. And that's about 4 or 5 miles. People tend to open it up here. It's still early in the race. You got a lot of good energy. I would say that sometimes people get a little too excited on this section and get to mile 11 and a half or so, which is the second time coming through Moonlight. And this is where in my mind, the real race starts as far as getting into some more big terrain. So you've got a big climb up, heading up what they call the Elkhorn Trail here. And we're heading into the headwaters basin below the headwaters chutes. There's the Headwaters Bowl aid station, which is for the 28K, because we're now on the 28K route. And then we wrap around into the north side of Lone Peak and what's called the North Summit Snowfield. I think Mike would agree. This is one of my favorite parts of the whole race. And you start to get into some pretty chunky terrain, I would call it, some really loose scree and the type of rock that's just big enough to move under your feet, but when it does, it might come up and hit your ankles. So people start to move a little bit slower with a little bit more intent. 28K and 50K come through this just really wild and remote area behind the North Summit Snowfield.
1 second here, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, keep going, or just pull it back. Yeah, because that's headwaters right there. And so this is like the start of the big climb for both the first big climb in both the 28 and 50K. You're climbing up to just a little over 10,000 feet. There's nobody out there but just the other runners. It's super, it's just a really cool part of the course. It feels really, really wild. And then you crest onto the top of the Headwaters Ridge and you get to run this knife edge ridge down what is some of the better ski terrain in the US in the winter on a resort. So a big descent down Headwaters, really exciting, really just aesthetic. You're looking across at the Lee Metcalf Wilderness, Spanish Peaks. Come off that descent and sure enough, you turn around, you start climbing back up into the bowl here below Lone Peak, and you get to the Swift Current aid station, which is both the 28K and 50K. From here, you've got the most intimidating climb of the day. You get up to 11,166 feet at the summit of Lone Peak. They call this Bone Crusher Ridge. And yeah, it's probably the kind of crown jewel of the course. It's part of our vertical kilometer, our 28 kilometer and 50 kilometer race. I think it climbs about 2,000 feet in a little over a mile. Yeah, really, beautiful. There's some exposed sections. People do need to take their time, especially on the knife ridge, kind of right in the middle, kind of the part that Joe's showing. I think he knows it well. It's part of the course on the race he puts on in the winter as well. So we have a summit aid station in both the 28K and 50K. Even though Swift Current and the summit are a couple miles apart, if that, it just takes so much time that people are pretty worked over by the time they get to the summit. And we want them to feel well fueled for probably the second most wild and remote section of the course, which is coming off of the summit all the way down into the Dakota Territory. So this descent is not to be taken lightly. It's steep, it's long, it's a big descent. And then as soon as you're done, you come out onto a dirt road that has like a steady gradual climb, and your legs do not want to turn over. So, you know, getting off that mountain fast is important, but you also still have a fair amount to go. You probably got about 10 miles to finish the race. And if it's the 50K, and I'm guessing maybe 5 or 6 if it's the 28K. You wrap around the south aspect. If it's a hot day, this section's pretty hot and people often don't bring enough water. If you're running the 50K, you've got the Shedhorn. You've got the Shedhorn aid station out there, which is just water only. And so people, 50Kers can refill there. 28Kers will hit that Moose Tracks aid station, which you'll see is that green cross there. So yeah, again, 28K, 50K still together at this point. So like I said, they really share a lot. And then you get the final slap to the face, which is the climb up Andesite Mountain, up a really steep downhill mountain bike trail called Africa. You know, on a rainy year, it gets pretty slick, and we've got some fun images of people just slipping and sliding everywhere trying to get up that thing. But not a huge climb, but obviously your body's tired at this point in the race, and you're hoping to get close to that finish. So people are pushing hard, but it's really hard, really, you know, a steep climb and challenging to get up. Now you get to the top of Andesite, and there's an aid station there for the 50K, not for the 28K, because what you do is you then descend down the front side of Andesite. It's that blue line that you're looking at right there, and descend all the way down right to the finish. And it's a quick descent. However, the 50K wraps around the backside of Andesite, and it's kind of an interesting section because you've gone through this runnable terrain and then this really rugged, slow mountain terrain, and suddenly you're back on this like pretty nice single track that is beautiful and non-technical, but your legs are tired and you're trying to get them to turn over and run fast again. So it requires this ability to kind of grind this last handful of miles on less technical trail. And so what you do is you wrap around the backside of Andesite. Small climb at the finish, which people are always cursing Mike's name and mine a little bit. And yeah, once you wrap around, you have finished the Rut 50K, and you can then walk over to the Mountain Project tent where Mike will be with chocolate milk and a tattoo artist to get your Rut tattoo.
And free mullets.
And free mullets. So if you want some character building experience post Rut 50K and 28K, you want to visit Mike and the Mountain Project tent. And no, I'm not kidding about anything I just said.
And if you beat Killian's time of 5:09, what do I get?
Whatever you want.
I got a truck, or give away a truck. How about that?
Awesome.
You don't know what kind of truck it is, but you get a truck.
So a lot of folks on this call may not be from Big Sky. They may not even be from Montana. They may be from the flatlands of New York City, like I grew up in. And so I had Mike send over a few trails that were similar to some of the terrain that you may see at the Rut. So Mike sent this one over. This is, and we'll put these in the chat. This is Mount Sentinel in Missoula, where Mike's calling it from. And Mike, can you talk about like why this is a similar trail to kind of a section of the Rut, and what can it kind of mimic if folks are getting out there and trying to train?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're calling from Ohio, which is where I grew up, I mean, it's tricky to find a lot of vertical gain and loss. But if you are in, an area where you can access mountains within a couple hours and you want to get your long run in and you want to be able to get some steeper terrain, I mean, it's pretty cool to be able to pop on something like onX and check it out. And like I showed this one because it highlights a variety of different trails that have different gradients. So if you look to the left side of that ridge, you'll see the northwest ridge of Mount Sentinel, which gains 2,000 feet in like 1.3 miles or so. And it is a great opportunity to get really steep power hiking in, which again is a big part of the rut. But also, as we talked about, there's runnable stuff, and there's trails on this that are much flatter and much more runnable and less technical. And I think the point is that you want to find a trail system near you, check out what's steep, check out what's flat, mix it up, like find the things that are more specific. Like I like to think about vertical gain per mile sometimes, like, oh, okay, like if I'm going to gain 2,000 feet in like if I'm going to go for, say, a 10-mile run and it's in preparation of the rut, which gains 10,000 feet in 30 miles, maybe I'm going to try and find something that's steep and make it steep enough to where I've gained like 3,000 feet in 10 miles so that I'm getting like that similar vertical gain and loss per mile that I would in the race. You don't have to do that every day, obviously. I wouldn't recommend it, but you want to train as specifically as possible. And, the Missoula, where I live, is great, but it's not super rocky or technical like the Rut or Lone Peak. But we all can't live right next to Lone Peak or whatever our objective is. And our local town trails can get it done if we can get creative. So for me, Mount Sentinel, and Mike, when he lived here for years, he was able to podium at some of the biggest races in the year going up and down this mountain. So it's about finding the training grounds that work for you and getting creative with it.
And so if we jump over to Bridger Ridge, which I think is right near Mike, in Bozeman now, and you sent me this one as well. It's a little longer trail. It's 10, almost 10 and a half miles. What does this have going for it? That kind of the similarities.
I'll let you speak to that, Wolfe.
Yeah, sure. I've run on these trails too much, probably. Same kind of variety. You see the steep trail on the right, that red trail, takes you right up to the ridge. This trail is more akin, some of the sections, to Lone Peak in terms of technical. There's some technical loose rock. You're on limestone. There's a lot of rock running. So there's that. You get a little bit more technical running on the ridge, which is nice. The other thing that is a perk of a place like Bozeman to have this kind of trail accessible is you can get a lot of uninterrupted climbing. So some places it's hard to get a lot of vertical feet per mile. You have to do like repeats, right? Where maybe you can only get a 400-foot climb in, and you got to run up 400 feet and then run back down and then run up 400 feet. One benefit to a place like this is you can run from the parking lot all the way up to the summit of the ridge, and you get 4,000 feet of uninterrupted climbing, and then you can turn around and run back down. So for a race like the Rut, it really simulates that long climb that you're going to be doing and then a long descent. So again, you don't need to have something like this, but to train for a race like the Rut, even if you can't do a lot of vertical uninterrupted, the more vertical you can do, where you climb and descend to build that leg stamina and then the eccentric muscle strength that you need for descending in a race like the Rut, because you're doing so much descending in hard terrain. You can use different trails like this to simulate that.
Awesome. And then last one, you guys sent me over this trail. This is kind of near where I live, here out in Western Colorado. This is the Buckskin Trail, and a little over 6 miles. And kind of familiar with this trail, but a little different. Why'd you pick this, Mike? Wolfe, Foote, sorry.
I just sent it to you because I knew it was in your backyard. I don't know that trail at all, but again, it's like, it's cool to see what you've got going on. Like, I mean, so that trail, obviously it's higher altitude, which is great. It's a long gradual climb. Like, I mean, that type of running builds great aerobic endurance without beating up your body too much. But yeah, I'll be honest, I sent it to you because I knew it was in your neck of the woods and it looked cool.
So if someone doesn't live in Colorado, they don't live in Bozeman, they don't live in Missoula, they live in Ohio, what's the recommended thing to do between now and a month out? Or what training can they get in if they don't live at altitude, really?
Wolf?
Say in general, if you don't live near the mountains, find any hill you possibly can and run up and down it as many times as you can. Certainly not like right up until race day, but the next 2 weeks, the more vert you can get in, the better. I mean, you can run stairs if you have to. The other thing that I wouldn't really recommend this close to the race, but just to keep in mind in general for training a race like the Rut, if you live somewhere where you don't have access to hills or mountains, is you can integrate in weighted hiking. It's better to do that earlier in your training. I wouldn't recommend it this close to race day, but you can, there's some good kind of training protocols to, hike up with water weight in your pack, dump the water weight, and then run down. And you can simulate that on short hills. That really builds that leg stamina and endurance, muscular endurance in your legs that transfers over to a race like this if you don't have access to running up and down lots of hills. But even little hills, as monotonous as it is better than nothing. The other thing you can do, Foote mentioned earlier, is, and again, it's getting close to race day, so I wouldn't recommend doing a lot of this or in high doses if you haven't done it before, but plyometric training, where you're essentially jumping and then loading your legs, your system in your legs eccentrically when you land. That also can help somewhat. If you don't have access to running downhill, if you jump and eccentrically load your system, that stimulates that muscle growth and the response that you want, that's similar to running downhill. So that can also help, but I'm not going to get into the weeds about that. I would just recommend hills at this point, but not too close to race day. Obviously, you want to taper.
And then, just speaking to altitude as well, I mean, the best thing you can do is live on the top of Lone Peak. The second best thing you can do is just be really aerobically fit. I mean, your body will be able to adapt hopefully better to the every individual is a little different, but just being in good shape and form and fitness for an event like this, like you should be more resilient to the altitude. I mean, everybody has to deal with it, but just being like, fitness it's kind of a simple thing to say, but it's probably one of the best things you can do, because just generally by doing that, you have a little bit higher oxygen carrying capacity, a little bit higher red blood cell count, all these things. So just working hard and training hard and is probably the best thing you can do if you can't just live at altitude.
The only thing I'd add, just to add on to what Foote just said, is the other thing I would say too that can definitely help you in this race is, I would say, I would guess 6 out of the 10 years we've run the race, it's been extremely hot. Would you agree with that, Foote?
Yeah, in recent years, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've had more years where it's been quite hot, as opposed to like we get some fall snowstorm or rainstorm. I think we've had more hot weather. So anyway, heat training could be beneficial if you live, like, it's summertime, most people can train when it's hot out at this point. Heat training can help at this race. You're at elevation in the race where you're going to lose more moisture from your body than you normally would at lower elevations. the sun is super intense up at 10, 11,000 feet. So you're going to get dehydrated. So anything you can do to hedge your bets to be more heat trained, I would recommend doing some heat training in the like 2 to 3 weeks before the race. And you don't have to do a lot of it. And you don't have to go out and like do intervals in the sun. You just need to go out and run during the heat of the day at a low heart rate for less than an hour even. And if like 4 to 5 days of that for a couple weeks is all you need. And there's also some now research coming out that is showing that heat training can be a supplement for altitude training. That I don't understand the physiology of it totally to explain it, but there is something beneficial that heat training actually helps you at altitude as well. So it's worth trying to do if you have the opportunity.
We had a few questions come in about tapering. And I have it listed here. Obviously, the guy holding the stack of ones had a plan for winning Western States, but what do you guys think about tapering in terms of this race, and how should we slice it up with 1 month out?
It's a good idea. I think that, it just depends. It depends on where the athlete's coming from. I think in general, this is cliche to a lot of people, but I think it's because it's true, is there's a big difference between being undercooked and overcooked at a race start line. And if you're overcooked, you just don't have that well to pull from when things get hard, and they will, because you're running a race. And so I think it's important to err on making sure you're more well rested once you get to that start line. With that said, the way that people, depending on somebody's training history and what this race is as a goal, maybe they're training, maybe they taper for a week, maybe they taper for 3 weeks. It just depends on the athlete and where they are in their cycle and how long they've been running. But yeah, it's pretty simple. I would say the most simple recipe would be start backing off at least 2 weeks out for sure, especially if this is like a real goal race for you, maybe a little bit longer. And what you want to do is you always want to keep that same weekly routine if you can. It's not about just stopping running. It's about lowering your volume bit by bit by bit as you head into the race. If you have a workout once a week, you're still doing that workout, but maybe you're doing 50% of what you did the week before. You're continuing to have those stimuli along the way, but you're just really taking it back. It shouldn't be, whatever training and stimulus you're bringing into your taper shouldn't be fatiguing you more. If anything, it should be invigorating you and keeping you in touch with that running routine that you have. I'll pass it on to Mike. I'm sure he has more to say.
I feel like you nailed it. That's the recipe, right? Especially just keeping it simple, not overthinking it is, I think everyone, should at least do the 7-day taper, but in general, I think Foote's right. Think about doing a 2-week taper leading into race is average and probably good for most people. And again, you're not just stopping running, or you're like, oh, I'm going to run 3 days this week instead of my normal 5 or 6 days this week. You're gradually decreasing that volume, but then keeping the stimulus, like Foote says, if you're still doing one quality workout or some kind of short interval session, you want to keep your body stimulated, but the goal is rest and adaptation at that point. And I think part of that taper is sleep, hydration, good food, and rest is another thing to think about during that taper, focusing on.
Awesome. So before we wrap it up here, I want to give 2 folks and 20 folks the chance to win 2 entries to the rut tonight. So this is it. Hit that QR code. The guys will drop that giveaway in the chat. This is for any race for the rut. This is for 11K, the 28K, the 50K. This race is sold out. And Mike, I think it's sold out at 2 hours this year, or maybe a little longer. But
yes,
in a day.
Something like that.
So this is probably your last chance to get in for this year's the Rut Race in Big Sky, Labor Day weekend. I'll leave it up for a few more seconds here and hit the link in the chat if you haven't seen it. And before we let these guys go, just want to open up to some Q&A. So we had a few come in here as we were chatting, but feel free to populate them in the Q&A if you have any more questions. There was one that was kind of I'm trying to relate to is power hiking versus running. What is that? Can you talk about that and where it comes into play?
Yeah, there comes a point when you're going uphill normally in a lot of trail and mountain running where it becomes more economical, like physically, to walk versus run. You can keep your heart rate lower. You can go at almost the similar pace that you were trying to run. And so it's about knowing where that is for you. You know, if you're always trying to run up a hill, but it actually doesn't make any sense because you feel like you're absolutely redlining it, start playing around with finding steep enough trails in your training, force you to hike a little bit. And when we talk about hiking, I think the difference, I always try to make a point to say, like, it doesn't mean suddenly you're just walking. You're like still moving up that trail with intent, but trying to find a pace that's more sustainable and manageable. And some people use poles, some people put their hands on their knees, but you're pushing your body up the hill still in a way that is a more efficient, economical way that will give you or allow you to keep the energy you need. A lot of times people just try and run until they absolutely can't, and then they're gassed, and then they're slowly walking up that hill. Whereas if you can integrate it in earlier, and again, walk with intent and purpose, you're going to be more efficient through that terrain. And it's hard, it's hard knowing when to do it, when not to. So getting out onto terrain like that and trying it out and finding out what works, it's a totally different movement. And so I find that if I just jump into something and try and do it hard and involves power hiking, my lower back gets sore or things like that. So it's good to integrate it into training before you're doing a race or objective that you'll have to do it, because it does have a little bit different movement to it.
Awesome. Another kind of central theme in some of the registration topics and Q&As were nutrition and maybe real food versus gels versus pickles versus sandwiches. Do you guys have an opinion? Obviously every aid station may have different things. Is there anything that you can recommend? What's the safe bet for a lot of folks, and how can they not screw this up?
I would say the biggest thing is you got to practice. It's just like going out and figuring out how power hiking as opposed to running uphill works for you. Is like in your training runs, especially your longer training runs, you have to fuel exactly like you think you might be during the event and experiment with different stuff. Like bring a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, bring some salty potato chips, bring some stuff you might see, you're going to see at the aid station. Use stuff that you think was going to work, gels or hydration mixes in your pack. What kind of electrolytes are you going to try? So you need to experiment and figure out what works. But you never know what's going to happen on race day, for sure. That's the other thing, is always go in with a mindset of you have a plan, but your plan is flexible, and you're going to have a mindset of being able to adapt and not have a rigid mindset, because that's going to lead to failure, right? I guess it's not a positive mindset to have when you're in the race, is be able to adapt. And I would say that everyone is so different. I feel like that's why you need to experiment and try these different things in training. But usually I feel like what happens to a lot of people is people just typically use product, whether they use gels or bars or the chewy bite things and some form of hydration mix in their bottles or their pack. And in a long race like the Rut, if you're going to be on your feet for 6, 8, 10 hours or more, at some point all that sugar in your gut usually is a bad mixture. So I feel like most people can handle the sugar. They can do it on a long training run. They're like, oh, my gut's fine. But then they get 8 hours into the race and they're dehydrated and nauseous from altitude. And all of a sudden they can't do sugar anymore. So that's when you need to be able to adapt. Like try something salty. Maybe you don't have to eat a peanut butter sandwich, but eat some chips, drink some pickle juice. I think a way to default if you're really feeling sick is to try liquids hydration as opposed to solid hydration. Usually you can keep down liquids better than solids or even gels. So drink Coke, drink ginger ale, drink some mix that you have in your drop bag or from your crew that seems to be okay on your gut. Those would be my kind of recommendations, I guess. Glossing over things, of course, but.
Awesome. So one last question before we wrap this up. Poles or no poles? What camp are you guys in?
Oh man. Well, I love using poles in longer ultra races. I'm always hesitant to tell somebody to use them unless they're really competent with them. So I think this is becoming a theme is you got to practice with them. And then once you add in the layer of the rut course and Lone Peak, I find poles to be tricky on that because the steepest sections are on often loose scree and talus, which can create a problem with getting poles stuck in between rocks and this and that. With that said, a lot of people use poles with success at the rut. So it's a personal preference. If you know how to use them well, they can be amazing at propelling your body forward and utilizing your full, quadrupedal motion. If you just like having them in your hands, they can get in the way. So just like we keep harping on, it's about practicing with them. I actually don't know what Mike's answer would be. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I on the rut course specifically, I would not personally use poles. No way. It's just because of the terrain. I feel like I would be more efficient power hiking, like hands on knees through that terrain, because it's so chunky and there's so many rocks. Poles, I think, would just get in my way and be totally annoying. People use them. But again, on other races, yeah, I definitely use poles on steep mountain races, but I wouldn't use them at the rut. I think you just need to be really comfortable with using them, and especially in nasty rocky terrain. If you've practiced and you're comfortable with it, then yeah, otherwise I think it's a bad idea.
Awesome. Well, on the note of bad ideas, thank you guys for joining. And hopefully not too many bad ideas come 1 month from now. And once again, if you don't have onX, this is a 2-month trial, 30% off for tonight only for anyone that's attended. And really want to appreciate the Mikes for joining us tonight to discuss the rut, and looking forward to seeing you guys in September. If you want to check out anything more about onX and what we're up to, here you go. But thanks again all. Really appreciate everyone tuning in, and be safe out there.